is Ramos Horta. I'm the Executive Director of the Diplomacy Training Program. In 1975, the East Timorese leadership decided to send someone to New York. And I, at the age of 26, found myself in a city which I had never visited before, and was then faced with the task of lobbying the United Nations system. I had had no previous experience in working through the UN. I had not read a manual, a human rights compendium that would teach me about the complex UN machinery in charge of promoting and enforcing human rights standards in the world. I spent about 16 years basically dealing with the international system, dealing with the United Nations. Throughout the 16 years, I then learned how to lobby the UN, and at the same time, I found out that Asia-Pacific organizations, Asia-Pacific people, non-governmental organizations, indigenous peoples, had very little representation in the UN, both in New York and in Geneva. And the few who went there, like me in 1975, had very little knowledge of how that complex machinery operated.
Throughout the world, individuals and non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, are actively involved in the defense of human rights. International meetings, like the United Nations, provide a forum and a place of negotiation where defenders of human rights can take their concerns and make them public, as well as engage in direct dialogue with governments. The United Nations does not provide easy solutions to intractable political problems. It is not a court of law where justice can be done. It is a place of hard-fought political battles, of states' interests, of constant lobby and negotiation. For defenders of human rights, international forums are difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. But if we are to help reform these institutions and make them apply the principles of law on which they are supposed to be based, and if we are going to be able to apply political pressure on our own governments by holding them to public scrutiny, then we need to know how to utilize these forums effectively. People's diplomacy is not just concerned with punishing the perpetrators of human rights abuses or of gaining space on news bulletins. It is part of the movement for popular participation in development, of self-determination of peoples as well as individual freedoms and the rule of law. Whether this be in response to persecution, poverty or environmental destruction, the defence and promotion of human rights is an activity that takes place not just in Geneva or New York. It is an activity of development and community workers. It takes place in refugee camps and urban slums, on city streets, on work sites and in remote villages. For too long, the field of human rights has been the province of specialists and NGOs from the developed north. Those involved directly are often the last ones to be heard. They are located a long way from New York or Geneva, and their own governments are often directly opposed to their concerns. The consequence is that few NGO representatives from the Asia-Pacific region take their issues to international forums like the UN. This relaxes the pressure on their own governments, who can easily dismiss the concerns raised by NGOs of the North as outside interference or cultural imperialism. Diplomacy is not the sole prerogative of the governments. Every country has its underclass, persecuted minorities and violations of human rights. Representation of those interests before the international community is a growing phenomenon, and it requires concrete understanding of the law, of the operation of international organizations like the United Nations, as well as the skills required to utilize these forums effectively. The diplomacy training program is formed specifically to offer training to people from developing countries to assist them to take their own human rights concerns directly to the international community.
Direct
This is the January 1992 session of the Diplomacy Training Program being conducted at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. 24 non-government participants from the Asia-Pacific region are attending a 4-week training session. The Diplomacy Training Program is not a typical university course. It uses UN models of actual or hypothetical situations to enable participants to learn directly, not just sit and listen to a lecture.
Yeah, this is what we want.
Multinational supervisory body.
Yeah.
Right, okay, fine.
They compose this subcommission. Yes?
The session starts with an introduction to international law and human rights, the status of treaties and the UN procedures. It focuses on the UN system and uses UN models, even though most participants may never go to Geneva or New York. These models develop skills as well as understandings of the nature of international relations and the difficulty of enforcing human rights standards. Being a practical training course, considerable time is given to skills development using role play and group workshop teaching techniques. Participants write and deliver short speeches, take part in discussion and work together in small groups. Exercises are designed carefully using practical examples of NGO activities at international meetings as well as case studies of country situations. Participants from previous sessions return to teach and recount their experiences.
My name is Ofelia Lopez, and I represent the Committee of Mothers of Political Prisoners Disappeared and Assassinated of El Salvador. And I found out about the Diplomacy Training Program in 91 session, and I participated, and I found it very helpful, specifically of learning new techniques of how to write the press release to address the mass media in Australia and present the human rights issue and the human rights abuses in El Salvador. So in this year, as a participant and working in presenting a study case of El Salvador through a workshop in this 1992 session has been quite a good experience as well, so that I understand more the needs of sharing what you have learned and developed, the knowledge that you have developed through practicing the human rights defense in wherever, can be in my country, El Salvador, or what is in this case, Australia. So I think it has been very helpful, and no longer after the experience in the training program, you feel not longer isolated. Specifically in defending human rights, you find that there are other people doing the same kind of job in developing new methods of workshops to denounce and delegitimize their own government in different areas of work.
What are the qualifications?
Working in small groups, writing speeches and resolutions, drafting press releases and presenting their case with facts and legal argument, participants in the Diplomacy Training Program learn of others' experiences and strategies. By keeping a personal journal throughout the sessions and formulating their own action plan for their return home, they are then better able to assess their own work and to create new strategies.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Security Council, and other delegates. As the representative of the Bougainville people, I am here to inform the United Nations in general and the Security Council in particular of the landing of some 400 Papua New Guinean troops on Bougainville on the 26th of January 1992.
In the Security Council crisis role play, participants play the roles of UN member states, exchanging their non-government priorities for considerations of states' interests, trade and strategic considerations. They discuss and solve, if possible, a current international crisis. In the January 1992 session, the crisis was the Bougainville Island situation. The role play is conducted realistically and thoroughly, the meeting continuing until a solution is found. It is a powerful teaching method as it involves the participants directly and often emotionally by having to take the part of the governments to which they are often opposed in real life.
The distinguished representative of Russia.
I would just like to, the Russian government would just like to express its reservation about the Brazilian proposal because given the population transfer issue would not just include, the proposition of a freezing of the influx of non-Bougainvillean does not limit itself to the referendum issue, but it also is concerned about the minoritization, the marginalization of Bougainvillean, meaning the influx of non-Bougainvillean will affect their culture as well.
Bearing in mind,
Each training session has a carefully constructed educational program designed specifically for the participants involved. It is constantly adapting and improving as each session is completed. Apart from the 4-week January session run each year in Sydney, shorter in-country sessions have been run for specific groups. These have included Australian Aboriginal organisations, human rights workers in Southeast Asia, and the Tibetan government in exile at Dharamsala in northern India. A complete set of notes is written for participants in each session called the Human Rights Defenders Manual. This is a reference tool for use after the session is over. The diplomacy training program is also developing special purpose workshops focusing on human rights and development. The first of these will be tested during 1992.
in the final analysis, the diplomacy training program means empowerment. Empowerment of individuals, of organizations, which at grassroots level, if they acquire a sound knowledge of the international legal system, of the human rights, conventions and procedures, they might be able to contribute towards effective social change in their home countries. We look forward to having you with us in our next diplomacy training program.